Hello, and welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. My name is Bruce Gemmel. I'm here with Julie Rauer. She'll be up in a minute. And we are basically Art Science Complex. And this is episode 47, Drawing in the Western Idiom, the Character of Western Draftsmanship. So basically, we've been chronicling a series of conversations and ideas that have been going on with my work, and we're incorporating work of Julie as well. And we've been, January 25th will be our 31st anniversary. It's not just an anniversary of two people in love, it's two people in love with each other and each other's work. So I think that's, a lot of people say, what's the key to longevity in a relationship, especially by people kind of fairly intense? And I think it is like having something common that is deeply devoted. You're both deeply devoted to. And I think, tonight was a good example. I had been struggling with a drawing, and Julie had made three specific observations that took a drawing that at certain times I was kind of had somewhat resigned myself to a certain degree of accomplishment. But because of Julie's observations, I was able to kind of get to a completely deeper level. Anyway, so as is my new kind of beginning, I start with a piece from one of the important kind of documents in my own education, and kind of how it kind of becomes a kind of a introduction to what we're going to talk about. So this comes from, again, something you've heard me talk about before, Alfred North Whitehead's Adventures of Ideas, Chapter 19, Adventure. The notion of civilization is very baffling. We all know what it means. It suggests a certain ideal for life on the earth, and this ideal concerns both the individual human being and also societies of men. A man can be civilized and a whole society can be civilized, although the sense are somewhat different in the two cases. Yet civilization is one of those general notions that are very difficult to define. We pronounce upon particular instances. We can say this is civilized or that is savage, yet somehow the general notion is elusive. Thus, we proceed by examples. During the last 6 centuries, the culture of Europe guided itself by example. The Greeks and Romans, at their best period, have been taken as the standard of civilizations. We have aimed at reproducing the excellence of these societies, preferably the society of Athens at its prime. These standards have served the Western races well, but the procedure has its disadvantages. It is backward looking, and it is limited to one type of social excellence. Today, the world is passing into a new age and its existence. New knowledge and new technologies are altering the proportions of things. The particular examples of an ancient society see it set too static and ideal and neglects the whole range of opportunity. It is really not sufficient to direct attention to the best that has said and done in this ancient world. The result is static. And this was a piece that I read in a preview on Wednesday. Repressive and promotes a decadent habit of mind. Also, and this is why this chapter, I think, being called Adventure is very, very important. And that's why we're going to talk about tonight. I suggest that the Greeks themselves were not backward looking or static. Compared to their neighbors, they were singularly unhistorical. They were speculative, adventurous, eager for novelty. The most un-Greek thing that we can do is to copy the Greeks, for emphatically, they were not copyists. Now, last week we talked about drawing and copying, and we said that just as if when one basically takes to this exercise, one understands it as an exercise. One is basically an adventure, and therefore one can consider it an artistic kind of enterprise, whereas one is basically a static, repressive thing, and it basically is dependent. Another danger is forming our notions of civilization, is to concentrate exclusively upon passive critical qualities concerned chiefly with the fine arts. Such qualities are an important element in a civilized society, but civilization is more than the appreciation of the fine arts. We must not tie it down to museums and studios. I put forward as a general definition of civilization that a civilized society is exhibiting the five qualities of truth, beauty, adventure, art, and peace. Hereby, the last quality of peace, I am not referring to political relations. I mean a quality of mind steady in its reliance that fine action is treasured in the nature of things. It is impossible in the short space of 5 chapters to discuss all the various questions which are suggested by these notions. In this chapter, I will concentrate upon a few points in philosophy and history which throw light upon the various functions of these elements in civilization. From the 3 preceding chapters and from the short explanation of as to peace, let us assume for the moment that truth, beauty, and peace are sufficiently obvious as to their meanings. We will now concentrate upon adventure and art as necessary elements in civilization. It is in respect to these 2 factors that prevalent concepts of civilization are weakest. Okay, with that in mind, we take to the idea of drawing in the Western idiom. Now, it has served us well. It is a specific thing. And what is its future? Is this part of the procedure? How will drawing change? Will drawing change? And will it be the tool that basically has the capacity to allow us to kind of uncover compelling artifacts? So, with that said, and I think that's great kind of adventurous kind of endeavor, let's talk about what is the best part of the program. What's new in this week in Julie?
Here I am.
Here we are. Okay.
I'm all set.
Oh, good for you.
Hello. I'm bringing my drawing over. Didn't want to take it over before it's time.
Stay well hydrated.
Yeah, should. I'm really tired. Okay. Okay.
So, what's new in Julie?
Well, I have almost completed my science drawing at the Met today of the lettuce sea slug and the necessaire. And it is about the subject or the mechanism, a fascinating mechanism called kleptoplasty. It's a very rare mechanism. This is the only animal that I know that really engages in full-fledged kleptoplasty, which is the theft of chloroplasts or plant organelles. And this lettuce sea slug then achieves the ability in perpetuity for its entire lifespan to photosynthesize.
Excellent.
And it's not just a matter of weeks or months. This can be for years. So it is literally called, and it's a funny name, the solar-powered slug. So do you have dry hands?
Yes.
Can you hold up my drawing? So Bruce is kindly holding up my drawing. I hope there's not a lot of glare. There's a lot of Derwent colored pencil, which are metallics. There's some Prismacolor, which I'm a lot less fond of because they're prone to breakage. And then there is graphite and some other things. But what you are seeing here are 2 species of lettuce sea slugs. They're wondrous creatures. They're glowing. They morph into what appears to be a leaf of Swiss chard that drifts on the wave. They can rear up and become dragons. They can look like, underwater Spanish moss. They are absolutely beautiful. They also have luminescent, just gorgeous colors, shades of aqua and lavender and deep ochre, pumpkin orange, purples. They're just beautiful. I mean, and also a single coil can actually morph from a violet to a pumpkin to an azure. They're incredible. And I suspect too, actually, that they have more abilities and have been recognized yet. And I believe one of those abilities is like that of the cuttlefish. And I believe in time that those in marine science, a very woefully funded branch of the sciences, will find they can camouflage themselves at will. And I believe that they do it via their stolen chloroplasts. What they have done is they have actually grown this organ, which I have depicted in my drawing, and there are very few actual scanning electron micrographs of this, which you'll see at the upper right, which is that round shape that contains many small items that look like a cluster of pecans or Brazil nuts. In fact, those are the stolen chloroplasts from the algae. They eat the algae, but they do not live in any way on the algae. The only way they are doing this is to, if you can hold it up for a moment, because I can't really hold endpoint. There is the kleptosome. So they have grown this organ, and this is rapid evolution. Now, this was not something that they were growing for thousands and thousands of years. It kind of sprung up extremely rapidly when they needed a place to store the stolen chloroplast. What is very interesting about this is if the lettuce sea slug did not develop this, it would have only been able to temporarily use them. Here, it can store them, it can house them, it can cultivate them. It's like having a lantern in an organ in your torso that glows for your entire life. Except for Bruce, yes. So it's a really rather beautiful idea. What I did today, if you can see, if you can move in a little closer, is you will see I am hybridizing it for a very specific purpose with a necessaire. And for those of you who hadn't tuned in previously, a necessaire is like the Swiss Army knife of toolboxes for the well-heeled traveler. There are British versions. This one is in the British wing at the Met. It is a French word, that which is necessary. And these are incredible tools. These are drafting tools. These are sewing tools. They're knives, they're scissors, they're tweezers, they're files, there are ointment jars, but above all, there are inkwells and writing tools and combs and spoons. And they all fit in these tiny little beautifully compact, these tiny little beautifully compact cases. And the tools each have a place like a puzzle game. One tool cannot fit in the space built and designed for another. And I have shown the tools here. And the tools are radiating out in a spoken wheel fashion, specifically around a second species of glowing green, which it is from the chlorophyll and the chloroplast, lettuce sea slug, in the act of siphoning out the chloroplast, which is a kinetic, and it's as if you could see through all of the veins in your body and they glowed with the light and the heat of the sun. It's a rather amazing thing. Okay. And it falls away at the very bottom. It pixelates and it fades out entirely. But what I've done here, if you wouldn't mind bringing it down and close, is I have shifted the lettuce sea slug, which coils from the top down and around, from a three-dimensional drawing here to the two-dimensional surface. So it melts into the turquoise and azure enamel surface of the top of the necessaire. It percolates like a fen. For those of you unfamiliar, a fen is a marshy bog or swamp. So it percolates. And as you know, bogs and swamps are cauldrons of life. Macro as well as microorganisms. And then it regains its three dimensionality in the top.
Okay. All right, good. That kind of puts us into a great
okay.
way to start the conversation. Now,
Yeah.
I would have to say that in terms of my view of drawing, I would say that I have never really understood or felt much beyond my just own desire to understand the idiom of drawing within what I would say the Western tradition. However, in your case,
Yeah.
because of your fascination and your kind of understanding of calligraphy and Edo period block prints and things like that, you understand and can contrast probably better than I can. It's kind of like if you know how to do things your way, you really don't know the other things that you're missing or that you're kind of like might have, inferior or superiority kind of reality to, but you have studied these things deeply and have a kind of understanding of it's like a person who speaks one language as opposed to someone who speaks five. But in my culture, I feel as if even in the broadness of kind of the different realities of the idiom in different locales and over time, you have this kind of perspective. So based on what we've just looked at, tell me about how those things mingle in the generation of your work.
Okay, that's an excellent introduction.
Thank you.
I think it's really vital to understand how I see space. Yes, I'm working. Technically, I'm of the West. I work in the Western idiom of drawing and painting, if you can call it that. But I think what's very important to understand is the way I see space, the way I inhabit space, both through the paintbrush, through the calligraphy pen. I am trained as a calligrapher, and through the drawing pencil, as well as the pen, as the writing pen, is a distinctly Eastern way to conceptualize space. And for those of you unfamiliar with my paintings, which you may be unfamiliar, I invite you to go to our website, artsciencecomplex.com, and where you can see a whole lot of Bruce's work and links to our published works in other places. You can see some of my early to mid-period paintings there. And you will note that in terms of background, I don't fill the background with, which is a very Western thing to do, is to fill every inch of the canvas, every inch of the drawing plane, every inch of the written word with material, whether it is a standardized background. Like if you look at a Constable painting, and we have seen many, many at the Met, he's a very good example of filling every millimeter of the canvas with something, even those things he wasn't really great at, like the bottoms of horses and cows. He never could ever paint their hooves or their legs or their feet. It's kind of funny.
That's why there was water to place them in.
There was water and fields and grass. But I do not have standardized Western backgrounds in any of my paintings or drawings.
True.
And that's a very big difference from most Western artists.
Yeah. True. I think in my case, kind of like coming up through my kind of like love of Leonardo and his, very clear kind of delineation style, I came to understand, very, very important things that I would say are these. What I would be the things that I would say were the things that defined for me the Western idiom. The main one was kind of perspective. And perspective basically was a central thing from which a lot of things revolved.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of metaphor and the idea of limited perspectives kind of basically emphasize for me both individuality, subjectivity,
Mm-hmm.
and certain nature of certain abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, aside from that, there's also the fact that in the word imagination, the term imagination in our kind of language comes from the idea of an image. And that image was basically conjured in terms of these particular facets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the nature of abstractions have changed over time, but the idea of the abstraction is basically tied to that three-dimensional point of view that basically is the individual. And
Mm-hmm.
that person, kind of, I think, being the artist, the architect, the engineer, that point of view, that idea identifies clearly with my idea of what I would call genius.
Mm-hmm.
We identify the drawing as the base element of all the visual arts, all the practical arts, and all the kind of construction arts, as I would
Mm-hmm.
call building, architecture, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the central focus, but more than that, the nature of that central focus is based on a particular point of view within a kind of like perspectival kind of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And these things have been things that, since the Romans, we've kind of come to kind of like be able to delineate certain mechanisms of how to draw
Mm-hmm.
perspective. As an architect, you're taught to draw perspective, but with very rare exceptions, architects are never taught to draw.
No, they're really not.
Artists are taught to draw, but they never learn perspective. So it's
That's
always funny
interesting.
because as an architect, it's always referred to as like, oh, Bruce, your particular style, your particular style.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really necessarily understand what that means because I
Mm-hmm.
draw basically from the way in which I see. And,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I've always said is that one should not think about learning to draw. One should learn how to see, and then drawing becomes much easier.
Mm-hmm. A quick interjection
No,
on perspective.
no.
Yes.
Ow.
That's so much fun.
It is.
Anyway,
Just do a backhanded one. Nice one.
So there is a Western preoccupation with what I would term the placement of self within a three-dimensional framework.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I define, and I will elucidate, because this is right to Bruce's point, and will now initiate another talking point. The placement of self within the three-dimensional framework is very much a Western preoccupation where you cannot watch the watchers. You are the lighthouse tower that is the watcher within the framework of your own three-dimensional construct, whether it be a painted construct, even a sculpted or drawn or written one. And by that, I mean they, in general, in the West, but there are some very, very big exceptions to this. And one is Van Gogh, who was a huge exception.
Mm-hmm.
Most of his paintings and all of his best work before he sadly died woefully prematurely are incredibly Eastern in their space. They're very choked up horizon line, which is something else we should talk about. Their flattened graphicism. He was not a Western painter. He was a Western painter with his Potato Farmers series, which I think are the worst things that he ever did. And they were very, very
Really?
early. Yes. They're incredibly Western. And he has placed himself as the viewer, not literally in there, but he is the watcher from a mid-ground perspective. Everything is at the same eye level. There is no playing with scales. There is no asymmetry. Everything, it would be as if a director is standing in one place and the actors and the scenery are drawn back and forth in front of a camera that is static. It's a static, one camera, single eye view of that, individual who crafted that scene. Now, in Chinese and Japanese art, that individual is almost never in their own construct.
Mhm.
Their graphicized view, let's take the 57 stations of the Tokaido or 36 views of Mount Fuji, the famous, justifiably so, incredible series of Edo period woodblock prints,
Mhm.
wherein you're always outside. You are the soaring eagle overhead. You are the lantern that swings off to the right.
Mhm.
You are a cicada that's way up on a precipice. It's a kinetic and unexpected outsiders
Mhm.
looking in at a scene,
Mhm.
not being the center like a
Mhm.
ringmaster.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
just had to flesh
No, I
that out.
understand that. I
Yeah.
understand that. I think, for me,
Back to you.
I always kind of like differentiated between what I would call like algorithmic thinking and kind of
Mhm.
metaphorical thinking. And I always kind of said, was the metaphor foreseeable? And that's been a
Mhm.
kind of like and I think this year I came to the conclusion that the metaphor is foreseeable, but it's only foreseeable if one can occupy every point of view, which basically understandable within the Western idiom is
Mhm.
impossible. So we would kind of have often kind of looked upon that individual who is a deity who has the ability to have ultimate point of view.
Mhm.
And I think that in terms of the concept of the metaphor,
Mhm.
as a result of abstraction, it is ultimately foreseeable only in terms of that idea of kind of ultimate perspectival understanding, which
Mhm.
is not which is limited to the idea of Western construction of of space. Now, also going back to your point, I think one of the things I also remember is that just the same way that Van Gogh was obsessed with the Eastern idiom,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
same Japanese Eastern idiom was understood and appreciated by Frank Lloyd Wright, who
Oh,
basically was
absolutely.
probably more successful as a print salesman than he ever was as an architect,
He
and probably
introduced the Japanese
introduced the
prince to this.
Japanese print to the United States.
Yeah.
And in fact, understood the fact that the contradiction between the kind of plasticity of spatial interaction within
Mhm.
Japanese architecture was very much in contrast with that of Edo period prints. What I would say is that the understanding of the fact that the horizon line in Eastern space was at the picture plane, as opposed to in the Western idiom, where there was a kind of like there was a receding of points of view, vanishing to a horizon line that was what way, way beyond the picture plane. So that I think was a major difference is the horizon line is always kind of like something that had a very interesting reality.
Mhm.
However, it was kind of like made to be very different in terms of its relationship to the picture plane relative to the difference between Eastern and Western space.
Mhm. Quick note.
Hmm? I should
In
do that too, because like interjects
Sure,
like I'm going to say something
I
now.
think that's a great idea.
Okay, I'm going to try that. Go ahead.
In
I'd like to say something.
Sure, what?
Just
Yeah,
trying. That was a test.
it's fun. So in the Edo period woodblock print, also on Momoyama screens, in the Muromachi prints as well, on Japanese album leaves, they used pattern as dimension. And in a lot of Western art, they use pattern as surface ornamentation, not pattern as dimension.
Mhm.
And there's a very big difference. They're also doing it within a tiny, tiny format, which is a testament to how incredibly effective the flattened, two dimensional, highly graphicized structuring of Eastern space really is. I mean, you have a 5 by 7 inch or 8 by 10 inch. They were rarely any larger.
Mhm.
And when they made a diptych or triptych, which they did, they were simply that print next to each other.
Mhm.
They were never huge. I
Mhm.
mean, so what do you
True.
think of the idea of pattern as dimension versus pattern as surface ornamentation?
Well, I think it depended on it depended on the relationship between that the two as relates to scale. I think that, like, the scale and the kind of like and the symmetries were able to kind of animate one in relation to the other.
Mhm.
Like that.
Yeah,
I thought it was good.
I thought that was
It
excellent.
was.
And
It was.
very well observed. Um,
Thank you.
I also think there was
Hmm.
a huge playing with scale shifts that did not happen as much in Western art as it did within the beautiful framework of the
Agreed.
woodblock print. I mean,
Agreed.
there's one famous print that has a turtle, hanging
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
future soup, and the turtle is hanging in the foreground, I believe, at the right, and it it is in this tiny, 5 by 7 inch space, quite enormous, and the village in the background doesn't even take up the visual space of half of the turtle's shell.
Hmm.
And what would be expected to be extremely large in Gulliver dimensions has been artfully reduced to Lilliputian scale. And I think that's fascinating. I mean, there is a narrative gallop in the Eastern work that I think is remarkable. You can get an entire tale out of one print without really knowing much about it. There's a
Hmm.
huge amount of visual information packed into a very, very small, beautifully designed format. And often in a Western piece, you have a very large format, often with not as much information. I'm not,
True.
yeah,
True. And I kind of
yeah,
think that kind of makes me,
mm,
brought something to my
yeah.
attention,
Well,
is that there was a certain kind of prejudice to scale specificity in perspective, and that it basically
uh-huh,
alienated what I would call the organic impulse.
mhm,
I think that there's a potential for that to be overcome. However, I don't think it is something that we've been able to overcome and may not even have been aware of it. I
mhm.
mean, what you're talking about is the fact that you could have a simultaneity of scales. Now, if we were to do that, we would basically have to do a frame within a frame within a frame,
Yeah.
whereas this would be something that would happen just by kind of changing textures.
Yeah, in a single small
Mhm,
frame,
mhm,
in a
mhm.
single
Yeah, so I
small
think one of
format.
the weaknesses, especially architecturally,
Mhm,
uh, with the dependence on the kind of draftsmanship of the Western idiom,
mhm.
is that inability to kind of like simultaneously understand scales of networks like you
Yeah,
would with a fractal. I
yeah.
mean, in a fractal, you kind of like keep coming back to a kind of like self-similar image, but the reality is you shift through things in order to kind of get to that repetitive image,
Mhm,
and it's not as if it's a completely static thing. So I believe that that's kind of
mhm.
part of my conclusion of how I would kind of bring in the potential for it. Because again, from the Renaissance, I mean, from the Romans and the Greeks back through the Renaissance, the rediscovery of perspective, and then the reintroduction of perspective and drawing and painting and architecture basically allowed us to get to a certain point, but it does have that limitation. And again, as much as I love Leonardo and I love, Frank Lloyd Wright and Bruce Goff and many others, I think this recognition, when I look at an object, it kind of, I need to be able to kind of take that telescopic
Mhm.
potential either with a microscope or a telescope and kind of see that simultaneously with this, which is hard given a perspectival point of view,
Mhm. There is one notable exception to that.
such as.
The Dutch Vanitas paintings, it's not in any way as extreme as the Japanese prints,
Mm,
but within, and it's not all of them, it's just
hmm.
certain of them, within the engineered, architected reflections that were an extremely large part of the intentionally chosen glass pieces
Hmm.
and metal pieces,
Hmm.
silver, gold, brass. There were intense worlds of a very minuscule scale
Hmm.
that were painted into what was a kind of mid range tabletop setting. And then
Hmm.
oftentimes through a window, you
Hmm.
would have a vast landscape now reduced to the size basically of a postcard.
Mm-hmm.
So there were
Mm-hmm.
some radical scale shifts, not as intentional, certainly not as graphic, and not
Mm-hmm.
as predominant as they were in Japanese prints, where almost every single print had a fairly radical shift in
Mm-hmm.
scale,
Mm-hmm.
quite
Mm-hmm.
intentionally.
True.
What are your thoughts on the Dutch
Well, I
paintings?
think what's interesting about that is just like architectural models, they're
Hmm.
basically miniatures,
Yeah.
and they kind of represent
Hmm.
different different scales. In fact, usually a model is built at a scale. I always feel as if, like,
Hmm.
kind of like there's a kind of like a miniature consequence to the incredible chamber ensemble nature of vanitas or
Hmm.
still life.
Yeah.
So it makes me think about the fact that one of the things that I think is the difference in terms of, as Whitehead warns, the idea of looking at something in the past
Hmm.
is not that it basically is the same tool that allows you to kind of have the same success in the future, but you have to
True.
evaluate the fact that on your adventure, if the adventure is basically that which fulfills you, right?
Hmm.
How is the tool to be used in the in the modern frame? So
That's a very, very good
yeah,
point.
so I think, let me start this idea, and we'll kind of carry through the end.
Hmm.
What I think makes sense is that, as just the same way that Whitehead has been able to kind of understand the kind of understand and overcome the static nature of metaphysics by introducing process. I believe that still that has the same potential to overcome the static nature of perspective,
Yeah.
in terms of the fact that there's a
Oh,
stable unit
yeah.
that exists for a limited
Hmm.
period of time based
Hmm.
on process. So basically, process based reality gives the potential for the simultaneity. Now, I have to illustrate that in order for that to be true. I mean, I kind of can
Hmm.
see it in my head, but I would have to show it in the case of
I'd
like a
love to see
drawing.
that.
Well, I have to think. I mean,
I
I
challenge
have,
you.
no, I know that's a challenge. It's a
Yeah.
challenge of the life, is the fact that, like,
Yeah.
what we've said is that there needs to be an
Mm.
organic architecture, and there's been an impulse for an organic architecture for a long time. But the stumbling
Mm.
block has been the fact that no one's been able to grow a building. But the potential is, some organisms literally grow their environment, or they kind of like construct their environment
The
in a way that's
termites.
much more, yeah. But again,
Mm.
sometimes it's, the termite basically is an interesting aspect, and we'll talk about Maeterlinck in coming times. But I think one of the things that he allowed me to understand was the incredible intricacy
Mm.
of the way in which termites build. They're
Mm.
blind, they don't have tools, they and they work strictly from the inside out, as if they were kind of blowing up a balloon.
Mm.
So they, because of their,
With the whole blueprint in their mind that they
right,
constantly adapt.
right. So the
Yeah.
thing is, because of their
Mm.
incredible vulnerability to ants, they cannot venture outside. So therefore, they have to constantly make sure that they're always aware if there's any breach, that it's
Mm.
instantly filled. But I mean, unlike, our construction, where we can basically build scaffolds outside and we can work
Mm.
outside and inside the building simultaneously, termites can't. So their bodies become their tool,
Mm.
and their internal organs, in terms of their, the digestive system, becomes their concrete plant.
It
So we have a
does.
concrete plant that basically brings the concrete to us that we use to build the building, and we pour it
It's a
into the
very
formwork.
laborious process.
But what's actually been there since the Romans. It's actually
Oh,
a beautiful process, but I mean, it's
I
much
mean,
more
yeah.
convoluted.
Then the
Right. I mean,
termitary, yeah.
honestly, I mean, I could only imagine if we kind of needed, 4 yards concrete, and instead of the plant sending out a truck, they sent out like 6 guys who were really big, and they basically kind of
Each with a
like,
pail.
each with a pail that they
Yeah.
would kind of take from their own bowels and kind of become
That would
the
be
four
fun.
yard. Yeah,
May I
exactly.
mention the book really fast, which
No,
we'll talk
exactly.
about in the
Because the thing is,
future?
it's something that
Yeah.
you found something in a related item,
Yeah.
from the termites, related to something you had in a conversation you had at an event you were at. So why don't you
Yes.
tell us
Yeah,
about
I
that?
was at an engineering and architecture event earlier this week. I can't say specifically with whom or where. That's our policy.
Secret.
It's a secret. Anyway, I was having several conversations with engineers, structural engineers, chemical engineers, and several architects, none of whom had ever heard of Maurice Maeterlinck's The Life of the White Ant, and none of whom had ever used an organic. Ooh, can I have a couple sips?
Mhm.
Had ever used an organic model for any of their building structures or systems, internally, externally. And the topic of this particular event were heating and cooling systems. And I broached the idea that the termitary is a brilliant HVAC engineering structure which maintains a constant temperature despite the weather outside and extremely hot climates where the termites like to live and
Mhm.
to build. And we'll go more into that since we want to stick to the topic at hand. But
Mhm.
we will, in a future episode, be talking about Maeterlinck's The Life of the White Ant, and that is another name for the termite. The first English language edition was published in 1927. He wrote in French. Anyway, we should probably move back to the
Mhm.
drawing.
Yeah. So my feeling is that we are poised at an interesting opportunity for drawing. I think I alluded to
Thank you.
this a few weeks ago when I was talking about
Mhm.
organic design thinking and the idea of the generation of the artifact.
Mm,
And I feel that there's a kind of an interesting opportunity here
Mhm.
that as process based,
Mhm.
drawing could conceivably be much more of a generator
Mhm.
of artifacts than basically the kind of tool to kind of delineate a kind of like static inertial formality. So
Mhm.
what I mean by that is that,
Yes,
you
please
know, I
explain.
think that the drawing capacity,
Mhm.
right, has the ability to generate artifacts rather than be the slave of the artifact. So
Mhm.
in fact, the imagination comes from the process itself, and it can be linked with model building, or it can be just isolated in itself. But I
Mhm.
believe drawing can be process, model
Mhm.
building can be process. So previously, the drawing served as a way in which one could kind of like get out an idea that was in the imagination. I believe it actually is the imagination itself.
Hmm,
Oh, I like that.
that is
I
nice.
believe drawing is the imagination itself.
Very well said.
Yeah. It's an imagination. It's an operation of imagination.
Mhm.
Okay, so drawing is the, what did I say it was?
Is the imagination
Imagine it
itself.
is imagination.
It is the imagination.
Yeah.
Yes. And then I have something a
I like that.
important
That's a
topic.
good one.
It's a great
That's what,
one.
sometimes we say these things, they're
Yeah,
like
we do.
brilliant.
I have an important topic.
Oh,
that
you're
is-
trying to up me on? Gonna do that
Not
on
at
me?
all.
You could though. You probably could.
Well, I'm about to.
Oh, good for you.
Okay.
Go, Julie, go.
The
Go, pussycat, go.
Thank you. Wow. 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 Anyway, the incorporation of the written word into Eastern art
Mm.
as opposed to the absence of the written word in Western art.
Mm.
And this is something people never ever talk about. There is almost no Chinese scroll painting, Chinese fan painting, Japanese woodblock print, or album leaf or scroll that does not incorporate calligraphy, that does not incorporate lines of text, a poem, a few phrases,
Mhm.
not just seals of ownership. That's not
Mhm.
what I'm talking
Mhm.
about. Yes, they have seals of ownership that are beautifully articulated stamps. They sometimes, in a funny way, overwhelm the actual work where it's just a cluster crowd of red paste stamps with the ink, which can be a little on the distracting side. I'm talking about the full and whole integration of calligraphic lines, of letter forms that are not an overlay. They are done in a hand to mimic the style of the painting itself by the painter.
Mhm.
I mean, they are generally done by the same person. There are sometimes a calligrapher will work on, on a painter's painting, but they're almost always. This was not the age of the segregated mind. I mean, a painter was a go master. A go master was a calligrapher. A calligrapher was a chef. They were poets. I mean, you were expected to be a well rounded individual. And sadly, now we have people who are specialists who have nothing special to say about anything.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
because this is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
In
I told
2D,
you.
in Eastern two-dimensional space,
Mhm.
the idea of the page is simultaneously present with the idea of the projected image.
Yeah.
Whereas in perspective, right, even an orthographic, non-perspectival, non-point of view, there it does not reduce itself to 2D reading. It
Mhm.
doesn't become a page. And I think in that case, you look at some of the beautiful kind of like, illuminated manuscripts, you look at some of the kind of like, kind of Middle Eastern pieces or the kind of
Yeah.
Persian, kind of
The
like Central Asians.
Indian miniature.
They're just absolutely, yeah. So, I
Yeah,
mean, the
they
thing
are
is,
stunning.
the page exists, but there's a certain transparency to the page that an image can basically be superimposed or overlaid without destroying the page.
Yeah.
Whereas though there is, even in in Cubism and some of their forms, we've seen
Yeah, there are
letters and symbols and
pieces
things
of
like that.
magazines
But
or
it was
painted
never in
newspapers.
such where basically you didn't that you had you kind of had the kind of simultaneity that you had in the Eastern idiom.
No, you
Yeah.
didn't.
I'll tell you,
Yeah.
this has been valuable because I
Yeah.
had always I've never had much desire to really understand, or I had probably had limited appreciation for Eastern space. I was always just kind of like, in the West we know how to draw, we have perspective, we do beautiful things, we have so much beautiful work to show. And I just always felt that there was a kind of superiority, and I still do believe that there are things that cannot be matched outside the West. But in this case, I do see certain problematic circumstances as well as certain advantages, for opportunity for exploitation of generation. So this has been a good discussion.
I'm the
so far.
Zaru Soba. He's the Linguini Pasta.
Yeah, I would say
humor.
gamelli pasta with pesto, or
that's how
kind of
I
like,
think of
yeah,
you, a
like
bowl of
I would say,
gamelli
yeah,
pasta.
gamelli pasta with a Genovese
That's
pesto.
twins. Yeah,
Yeah, without a doubt,
kind.
without a doubt. And like I would say, without
Always
a doubt.
had capers.
Yeah, of course.
But see, here is the thing too. In Cubism, where I'd say that's one of the movements, along with the
which is more two-dimensional.
Yes, which
was
much
flattened,
more
which was much more
it's
flattened.
much more flattened. It's graphicized. This was not a perspectival imagining of space. It was far closer to the Japanese ideal of space. And in fact, most of the Cubists, they collected the Japanese prints. But the point is, they were very much steeped in the early ephemera of the day. There were huge leaps and gallops in printing then when Cubism was happening. Magazines were exploding, and most importantly, the poster. And I'd like to talk about the poster.
That's a topic for the future too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, the loss of the poster as a graphic image.
What the hell is that?
I don't know. They were being invaded.
I mean, every one of that is really weird. Some of the very best pieces that Toulouse.
Get to the chopper.
That's really creepy. Anyway, it sounds like they're literally outside the window.
Yeah, it's a police chopper.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, what I was going to say was the best pieces that Toulouse-Lautrec, who also died at like age 35 or 36, ever did were posters advertising the Bicyclette or the Moulin Rouge or Le Chat Noir, or stores that sold cheese or lingerie. But this was the perfect integration of
Someone say
image and
lingerie?
type. Lingerie, yes,
Say it again.
lingerie. These were the perfect integration of image and type, very much in the same way that the calligraphic hand in the Chinese scroll or the album leaf or the Japanese print had the type not just hovering there like a chopper, but say carved into a gourd, careening from a rooftop like pouring rain, tangled in the branches of trees. Very cleverly, very articulate in the visual manipulation of type, which was treated like an image, like a graphicized type of an image. It was afforded the same noble place as the image itself. Sorry, So, would you like to talk about the posters or Toulouse-Lautrec?
No, I love Toulouse-Lautrec, and I think that the idea of the loss of the poster as a kind of as a physical thing in the public space, as an act of work, is something that I think is really missing. I mean, even the graph. I mean, there probably was a time when the work in the public realm, art in the public realm was kind of something that we kind of had more access to. But I think the loss of the street poster is a terrible loss, just like we talked about the idea of loss of 2D design as a process. But this is the loss of an artifact that was a very important part of public culture. So that'll be a part, that'll be something to look forward to. I mean, billboards and and street posters,
and all of the signage used to be hand drawn.
Yeah. So I think that the loss of the poster in the public forum is definitely something that should be maybe investigated. So we'll basically look to do that in the coming times.
And very importantly, based on what you were saying, people now don't realize it, that the Edo period woodblock print, even at its height, was literally affordable to everyone. These were not printed on archival museum quality paper. They could be had for the price of a bowl of noodles. So they were in the consciousness of the public, not as high white tower pieces that no one ever saw. Everyone saw them. This was the capturing of the stations of the Tokaido. This is how the traveler knew what the 57 stations of the Tokaido were. This is what inspired them to travel. And this is what I will say, this is what cultivated the adventurous mind.
In the East.
Yes, these posters, and in fact, in the West, those select people like Toulouse-Lautrec, this was how the public saw what was inside the dance halls. This is how they got to know the performers. This is how they would see what was under the big top in the circus or the velodrome. This very much was their television and their movies and their news. It's very important, and people do not realize what has truly been lost here.
True.
Yeah.
And we might be able to link that back to the idea of that it had something also to do with the fact that the appreciation and understanding of the 2D design at its kind of fundamental level. This might have been the first casualty, because the thing is, as we talked about, and we kind of referred to the kind of witness in Borges, where he talks about the fact what gets lost and what's never to return. Something important that's lost, you will never be aware of it. You just simply are not, and sometimes the last person who had a certain knowledge, that knowledge can be significant. and it can be lost and misunderstood at the same time. So I believe that is a potential of what we're looking at here. So anyway, we're getting close to the end here. This was
All
a
right.
fascinating discussion.
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay. So this was drawing in the West Idiom. Next one is your lexicon. Oh, nice, good. So that basically,
What?
Your lexicon, your particular language. We've
well,
talked about
that'll
this,
be fascinating.
before, and this is a good thing to talk about because again, I believe any strong individual basically generates those words that are kind of fundamental to the way in which that person kind of constructs their philosophy within their realm. So, I mean, I know that in my case, if one was to make a word map, certain words would be very big. And the bigger those words, there's probably a very specific investigation that has gone on in terms of defining those terms for myself. And I believe that's the kind of case. I mean, when I read philosophy, or when I read philosophy, because it's not, I always love to kind of understand the kind of like the purity of the etymology in which certain people like Ortega or Heidegger basically had a certain reverence to the historical. And then on the other hand, there were other writers who basically felt there was a kind of much more of a kind of plastic imagination in terms of the way in which they constructed concepts. I'd say I'm more in the latter, but I kind of definitely respect the former. So, that's something that I think, kind of helps you understand and appreciate your particular way in which you construct work. So, as we're closing up here, any last thoughts?
Yes. The Suramono print. I will leave you all with that. In the world of Japanese prints, they brought the grandeur of the artifact, the built object, the furniture, into the microcosm of the woodblock print. These were meant as gifts. These were meant to dazzle, impress. They were as beautiful as can be, and they used metallic paint and silver leaf and gold leaf. And the calligraphy was incredibly dominant and incredibly showy and combined beautifully with the images.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's it for now. Next week, the lexicon, or your lexicon. So the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's the benefit of all for us to keep it just that way.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so tired.